In this video, I'm going to take a look at what it's like to use a 90-year-old cine lens on today's digital cameras. The lens in question is a Dallmeyer 1-inch f1.5 C-mount lens. It's the first old cine lens I've tried, and what a lens it is, full of surprises and magical images. I'm particularly grateful to Milan for recommending this specific Dallmeyer lens, and you can see Milan's images with his lens on Flickr. The lens was made in England. Dallmeyer was founded in London in 1860 and continued to manufacture high-quality lenses for all kinds of applications until around the mid-20th century. Some Dallmeyer lenses have a cult following in certain parts of the world, where they are highly prized for their beautiful bokeh, and they can sell for many thousands of dollars. For example, type Dallmeyer Super 6 into eBay, and you'll see what I mean. Not all old Dallmeyer lenses are in this league. My lens costs around $150. Still a lot of money, but it seemed like it could be a lot of fun, and potentially a good investment, given demand for these lenses. This is what the lens looks like on a contemporary cine camera, seen recently on eBay. So let's have a look at the lens. It's tiny. It has f-stops from an impressively speedy f1.5 to f16 and 8 aperture blades. The clickless aperture mechanism and the focus ring are quite stiff to turn, but they work okay. And the lens focuses from infinity to around 1 foot or 0.3 of a meter minimum focus distance. The lens has a C-mount, which is a small screw mount, and it was easy to find a simple C-mount adapter for my Sony camera. It needs to be near the sensor, but it's in no danger of hitting the sensor. Once it's on the camera, the lens doesn't cover a full frame, as you can see here. But it does cover a 1.5 crop sensor frame. Stop right down, there are no signs of vignetting, but wide open there is a bit of vignetting, but nothing serious. My lens came with a hood and a set of coloured filters. The hood would be a useful addition, as the lens is essentially uncoated, and it could help to improve contrast. But if you screw on the hood, when you use it on a crop sensor, the outline of the hood is clearly apparent in the frame. This circular frame is actually an important clue to how and why the lens performs the way it does on a crop sensor, as I'll show you later. One other point about my lens: when I bought it, it was rather dirty inside. The seller described it as having dust and debris, and they weren't kidding. This dust and debris was plain to see in wide open and stop-down images. So a week after buying the lens, I plucked up enough courage to open up the front, blow out the debris, and clean the glass inside. Fortunately, this was a simple task. Now on to how the lens performs on digital cameras, starting with it stopped right down to f16. And I'll return for a moment to the dirty sky stop-down photo. It's straight out of camera, just downsized for the video. This image was the first big surprise, not because of the dirt, but because nearly all the images I've seen online were where the lens was wide open or wider open, and the images are quite dramatically swirly and distorted away from the center. However, stop right down, my lens produces reasonably conventional-looking images. By conventional, I mean there's not the huge amount of distortion away from the center you see when the lens is wider open. It often helps to boost the contrasts and colors with the straight-out-of-camera images, but that's to be expected with a lens of this age, especially without a hood. Once you do some post-processing, you get what are, in my opinion, rather lovely-looking images. I think I'd describe them as old-fashioned looking. Old-fashioned because while the images are reasonably sharp at the center, the overall effect of the image is one of a softer rendering and softer colors. If your pixel peep towards the edges, the rendering of objects like these buildings is less sharp and somewhat distorted. The buildings look a little stretched out, for example. Looking at this scene, it's clear that the lens hasn't rendered the details well enough on the right-hand edge of the image to allow us to read the door number. Personally, since I'm never going to use this lens as a landscape lens, I don't mind these softer, slightly distorted edges. Indeed, I think they give images more of a pop at the center. The sort of pop that works particularly well for stop-down portraits. And this shot taken indoors, nicely sharp at the center, combined with a softer rendering towards the edges, complementing our cat's soft fur. So that's stop-down performance. Now as soon as you start to open up the lens, the fun begins. Take these photographs of some fairy lights starting at f16, with the lens focused on a candle in the foreground. As you open up the blades, the lens produces rather nice bubbles from the out of focus lights, and these bubbles get progressively swirlier. Interestingly, at f1.5, the bubbles just about retain their shape until you move beyond this circle, and then they become really quite distorted, much flatter, with strange chromatic aberrations. I'll return to this effect later. To see how the lens's swirly rendering impacts photographs taken outside, here's a comparison of 3 images taken stop right down at around f4 and then f1.5. I've tried to focus on the ladybird, as we call them in England. With the stop right down image, the center sharpness, zooming in on the ladybird, is very impressive. The sharpness is still very good at around f4, zooming in again on the ladybird. Wide open at f1.5, the swirls are in full force, but the ladybird at the center remains nicely sharp. And here are some more wide open shots that show some nice center sharpness. Talking about that swirly look, so far I've been selecting compositions that are relatively tame in terms of dramatic foregrounds and backgrounds. So let's now go for scenes where the background and foreground objects and light really accentuate the lens's dramatic rendering. This is a good place to start, a scene with a lot of out-of-focus highlights. And hey presto, the lens produces a magical swirly image. As you can tell, I've done quite a lot of processing to these images, bringing out the details and playing with the colours and hues. And here's a mix of other wide open images with fascinating effects. I've tested the lens's sharpness and swirls as you stop it down a little, because with the vast majority of lenses, when you stop down a few stops, the lens gets sharper and the swirls tend to disappear or become less pronounced. An intriguing aspect of this lens is that indoors under artificial lights, judging by these shots, when you stop down a little with this lens, you don't see a massive increase in center sharpness, nor a strong reduction in the swirliness, until you get near f16. Outdoors, there is a difference in the sharpness, and that's because as you stop down a little, the contrasts get better. Wide open, the lens doesn't always have a lot of contrast, but this improves stopping down. The good news is that if you're a fan of swirls, the swirls still remain in force when you stop down quite a long way. The overall look of some of these images reminds me of what happens when you reverse the front element of a conventional camera lens, such as this one from an Auto Takuma 35 f2.3. You have a sharp center, and then away from the center you have the swirls, and then a distinct circle, and beyond that circle, a different set of swirly effects, with coma effects. The Dallmeyer produces a similar set of effects and transitions, also with a distinct circle towards the edges. The lens was not designed to cover even a 1.5 times crop sensor. The area covered by a 16mm cine camera film is far smaller. If you look at how the lens's hood intrudes on a crop sensor image, you get a better impression of the size of the image from a cine camera. I can demonstrate this technically by drawing the different frame sizes from full frame to APS-C with a 1.5 times crop to the picture-taking area of a 16mm cine camera. If I superimpose an image taken with a crop sensor onto these frames, you can see how much of the image a 16mm cine camera would actually cover. And as you can see, it's a far less dramatic result, with most of the really dramatic stuff missing. Fortunately for lovers of dramatic imperfections, on crop sensors we're getting to see the wilder parts of the image, and there's a lot of goodness in those areas. This is clearly not conventional photography. With conventional photography and conventional camera lenses, you're essentially trying to capture how a scene looks to the human eye, maybe with a closer up view or a wider angle view, but still it's going to look reasonably realistic. In contrast, with the Dallmeyer wide open, you're creating a piece of more dramatic art. At the center, yes, you're seeing a conventional image, but then that is combined with a surrounding area that looks strange and quite beautiful, at least to my eyes. And critically, for photographers and viewers who enjoy these kinds of effects, the effects are hard to recreate using post-processing software. Yes, you can introduce motion blur or other blur filters, and you can clone in some distorted out-of-focus highlights, but it's not going to be the same as the dramatic combination of distortions and aberrations produced by the lens itself. In other words, you can't fake it, and you need a lens like this to make these styles of image. So that's my take on this fascinating old cine lens, a lens that can produce quite normal photographs stopped right down, to beautifully rendered photographs wider open, to magical, swirly, artistic images. If you'd like to learn more about Dallmeyer lenses and their designs, there's more information online. And if you have your own favourite cine lenses adapted to digital cameras, it'll be great if you could tell us more about those lenses in the comments below. It'll make very interesting reading. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and until the next time, all the best.